morning. There's a story I read about a fellow called Tom. As a very young child, he was charming and outgoing, but a bit of a rascal. And that rascal tendency grew and developed as he got older. And he got himself into all sorts of trouble, both at home and particularly at school. Getting offside with teachers, disrupting classes, always making jokes, and ultimately not appearing too interested. It got to such a point that in high school the principal had a file on him and felt that the only option ahead was to expel him. He was just disrupting everything and teachers were complaining, and the only option would be, other than that, was Mrs. Warren. Mrs. Warren was an English teacher, an excellent English teacher, a really good teacher, but also had this gift of working with troubled and disturbed children, kids that were had problems or making problems in class. So the principal talked to Mrs. Warren about Tom, and she readily agreed to take him into her English class and to a homeroom class at the end of school. The principal, wanting to make sure that she was fully aware of Tom and what he'd been up to, started reading the kind of complaints against him. And she said, "It's okay. I've heard about Tom. I know what I'm in for. I'm happy to have him in my class." And so Tom turns up to Mrs. Warren's English class and he sits in the back and he appears disinterested and just ignoring the teacher and not interested, not taking much notice of what's going on. At one point, he bumped the guy in front and told him something funny, made the guy laugh, and Mrs. Warren looked up. She didn't reprimand him or say anything against him, but after a moment, she just moved a chair next to hers at the front of the classroom and said in a very inviting voice, Tom, would you like to come down here and sit in this chair with me?" And it was so inviting and so lovely that Tom couldn't refuse. So off he went and sat in this chair next to hers. And then she said to the class, "Look, Tom's new in our class and he hasn't had a chance to do the work that you've done. And so I don't expect him to have read what we're up to. So I'd like to indulge him and you, and read to him the passage that you've read at home." And so she began to read from A Tale of Two Cities. And she read with such passion and inflections in a voice that Tom and others couldn't help but be caught up in the story. He felt the story as she told it. She told it in such a beautiful way. Anyway, that night, surprising everyone in his family, Tom did his homework, or at least Mrs. Warren's class assignment. And from that day forward, he never missed another day of school. He cut classes, but never Mrs. Warren's. And after things settled down a bit, he asked her, could she suggest a list of books that he could read in spare time, things that would interest him. And so she compiled a list and he began to read. And then he began to stay after school, after the other students had gone, to discuss with Mrs. Warren the things he was reading and learning and talk about it. And they talked for a long time. All was going really well until one day there was a blow up at home. And he stormed out and he joined the Navy. He didn't even go and say goodbye to Mrs. Warren. He just ran off. Mrs. Warren herself felt she'd failed. She'd failed Tom. What could she have done differently? What did she do wrong? Then 7 years later, she was just packing up her desk for the end of the day to go home when there was a knock at the door, and she looked up and there he was. It was Tom. She recognised him straight away. He was bigger and more muscular and filled out, but it was Tom. And she said, "Come in." And he rushed over and gave her a hug. He hugged her so tightly that her glasses fell off her face. And when he let go and she pulled back, she put the glasses on and looked at him, and he looked happy, content, well. And she said, what are you up to? And he said, "Well, I've been getting some education." And she said, but I thought you thought I was in the Navy. Well, I was. I joined the Navy, but they allowed me to do school there. And I started doing more schoolwork, and then I enlisted in some college programs. And when my enlistment finished, I kept going with the college, and I married a girl, and we've got a child and settled down. And then I did some graduate study, and I'm a teacher. Oh, what do you teach? I'm an English teacher, and I specialise in children who've got troubles, who are causing problems, just like I was. And they talked. Something shifted in Tom, in his class with Mrs. Warren, in her inviting, accepting, treating him with respect and dignity. Something shifted in him and changed the direction of his life, helped him to see the world in a different way. This week is the end of the season of Epiphany, and it's the last week of Epiphany, which is called Transfiguration Sunday. It comes from the story in all four of the stories of Jesus, but this year in Matthew. It's a story where Jesus has just shared with his disciples, asked them, who do you think I am? Who am I? And the disciples, caught in this question, declare him to be the Messiah. And he says, you're right. And then goes on to say, we're going to Jerusalem, and there I'll be arrested by the religious leaders, handed over to the Romans, I'll be crucified, died, and I'll rise again on the third day. And Peter's, what? That's not what we just said. You're the Messiah. For Peter and the disciples and others, the traditional understanding of the Messiah as a military, religious, kingly kind of figure who would restore the well-being of the nation of Israel under God, would gather the armies and drive the Roman oppressors out and restore Israel to its former glory. And Jesus says, no, that's not who I am. But you're the Messiah, that's what we're expecting in the Messiah. And Jesus says, that's not who the Messiah is. And in this story this week, he takes three of the disciples, three being the inner sanctum, the inner core, but also the number of witnesses. That's the number that you need to witness to what God is doing. Takes them up a mountain. Mountains are fairly important in Matthew's gospel. And up there, they behold this vision experience where Jesus is changed and he glows white. And then he's standing talking with two of the Old Testament heroes, Moses and Elijah. And they're talking to him. He's the key, the senior figure, the Holy One. And they're talking with him. And Peter and the disciples are filled with awe and wonder. And Peter says, maybe we should build 3 tents for you and for Moses and Elijah. Peter wants to hang on to this scene, to hold it forever, to cling and define and control and not let it go away. But even while he's speaking, this cloud envelops them, and this voice out of the cloud says, this is my son, my beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. The same voice that Jesus heard at his baptism. And the disciples are afraid and cowering down. And Jesus goes up and touches them and says it's okay. And they look up and the cloud's gone and Jesus is just there standing in his normal state. And he tells them not to tell anyone, not until it's all fulfilled. Then they go down the mountain, and the other disciples are wrestling with this problem, a father and a son who's got an epileptic seizure that won't let him go. And the disciples are trying to help him and heal him, but they don't know how. And Jesus shows them through prayer, in naming the demon and releasing this boy. It's a story that on the mountain there is this revelation, this vision of what will be, of Jesus glorified. But what it is the realization that what Jesus is saying about himself is true. Listen to what he's saying. He will die and rise. And that confuses and astounds the disciples even more. Their whole consciousness has been transfigured, twisted, changed from expecting Messiah who's a military leader who will lead with violence and power and might, to one who will suffer and die and rise, whatever that means. And then when they go down the hill, this is where the life is lived, not up on the mountaintop in the vision, in the great place, the beautiful place, the awe and wonder. It's down where reality hits the road, the rubber hits the road, and there's pain and struggle. And that's where we're called to be and to minister. And in this story, there's this transfigurative moment where the disciples begin to see the world in a different way. The expectations and the hopes and the dreams and whatever they had, which had come out of their tradition and experience, are transformed into this new way where it's not about violence and military might and power. It's about love and connection and resonance and relationship and community and prayer and healing, and that life will come out of death, and that the power of God is not revealed in dominating and power above and over and violence and strength, but in love and justice. And this one will die for the sake of love, of hope, of peace, of truth and of justice, and invites us into this way of life. It is about giving of self and learning from another the way of life. What will it take for our worldview to shift from the dominant worldview around us to this reign of God, a reign of love, justice, hope and peace?